Welcome to Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan Collin, an independent researcher, alchemist, and a student of the inventor and vortex fusion specialist Malcolm Bendall. Here we are at part 7 of Alchemical Science's Alpha and Omega ladder series, but don't worry if this is the first part that you've stumbled upon. Each video can be viewed standalone, and this is just as good a place to start as any other place. Throughout the series, we have been exploring the simultaneously ancient and emerging science of plasmoid generation and the stepwise fusion or transmutation of the elements in Malcolm Bendall's Thunderstorm Generator. We will, of course, continue on in this theme in part 6, where we'll hear again from Professor Robert Haralick, who we've already heard from in parts 1 and 2, if you've seen those videos. In the timeline of events that has happened so far, this lecture was actually recorded before the others in the series back in May this year. Dr. Haralick goes into a lot of detail in this one, speaking once again about Malcolm's Thunderstorm Generator and the plasmoid generation process occurring in the bubbler, the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project analysis of the transmutation artifacts found on the samples taken from the Thunderstorm Generator Spheres of the Vajra, the Alpha and Omega ladder process and its relevance to the stepwise process of fusion occurring in these reactions, water coherence domains and the birth of the water-borne plasmoid, vacuum energy, geometry, resonance. You get the idea. We are, for those who are new to the channel, essentially talking about real alchemy, not just theory, but alchemy practically applied. Although we're finding ample evidence of these processes in the Thunderstorm Generator, Robert's dissertation is of course primarily a hypothesis, although many parts, including the most integral processes you'll hear him speak concisely and technically on, they're strongly supported or already proven beyond reasonable doubt by existing empirical research, some of which he references in this presentation. Dr. Haralick is a heavyweight in this field, and he's someone I have a deep personal respect for. He is what I like to call a true scientist, not because of the various qualifications that I'm about to reel off, but because of his approach to the scientific process. You'll see what I mean in the following lecture. A little more about Professor Haralick, though. He is a distinguished professor emeritus in the PhD program in computer science at the Graduate Center in the city of New York. He has worked on and found practical solutions and algorithms for problems in the fields of high-level computer vision, document understanding, computer vision, performance, characterization, and covariance propagation, medical image processing, and most notably in recent times, he's been working on the new emerging science of water. And he's worked with some notable scientists on this in the past too, including Luc Montagnier, who many of you may be aware of. He's done some really interesting work on water. Dr. Haralick is also a fellow of the IAPR, the International Association for Pattern Recognition, for his contributions, including 650 published papers, and he served as the president of the IAPR too. His publication record can be found on Google Scholar, which by their own count has received over 85,000 citations to his papers in scientific literature, and the citations even this year are increasing over 2,000 citations a year. At the end of 2021, Professor Haralick retired from the City University of New York after 52 years of being on university faculties. About 40 of those years served in the role of distinguished professor. And he's retired to set up his own laboratory for research on the new emerging science of water, including what we're going to talk about today. But ultimately, he wants to do experiments to show that a person's conscious intention can change the water, and the change in the water that can be detected by sensitive instruments in his laboratory. So as usual, you'll find resources for everything we talk about in the description. I have provided the link to my own website, as well as strikefoundation.earth, where you'll find a downloadable and printable copy of Malcolm Bendall's Alpha and Omega ladder diagram, along with his notes, lectures, and research. Of course, haralick.org, where you can find out more about Dr. Robert Haralick and his work, and Zayatheria, which is Sheila Raman's YouTube channel, where you can find out more about her research on frequency. And you'll also find the link to Alpha Prospects, who are the licensees of the Thunderstorm Generator technology, and they handle commercial and investment inquiries, and howtube.com, where along with Malcolm's original lecture series, you can find the video-on-demand lectures from Tesla Tech this year, and the previous years as well. So both this year's conference, which featured Robert as well as Moray King, Bob Greenyer, Paul Harris, Terrence Howard, and plenty of other really great speakers. And in the previous years, 2 years ago, the Thunderstorm Generator was first demoed to the public, of course. But let's now hear from Professor Robert Haralick. I hope you will get as much out of this as I did. If at any point you're getting lost, I'd suggest just going back and watching the previous part in this video series first, the stepwise elemental fusion in the Thunderstorm Generator, Malcolm Bendall's Alpha and Omega ladder. This is where I try and simplify many of these ideas down into a broader overview. But whether you're a scientist or not, Robert is a very clear and patient teacher, and I don't think anyone will struggle too much to follow along with this video, so give it a try. Enjoy!
Everything that I published is out in the open. My idea was that if one is in the university environment, you're there not only to teach the students, not only to do research, but for that research to be given to the society so that the society can use it to do its own advancement. And this is what's basically happened to my work. Another thing I'd like to mention before I start is the meeting that I had with Malcolm, which I think now was about 2 years ago. And it was such a surprise. Malcolm talked extensively about what I heard him talking in the background about the numbers, and the numbers are more than numbers. They have qualities and information. And if you know how to put everything together, you're able to actually design a device, an instrument, something that's useful for society. This knowledge that Malcolm has is not the usual knowledge that one has in the current educational system for engineering or science and physics. It's a completely different kind of knowledge. And he even went so far to tell me that in order to start to learn what he was learning, the new things that he was learning many years ago, he basically had to forget everything that he learned in the university. And the last thing I want to say is that his knowledge and the things that he's written is not part of the current paradigm in science. And the fact that he's done it, and the fact that he's able to produce something that's useful using that kind of knowledge, is just indicative of the genius that he actually is. So with that, I think we'll start the presentation. Can we start putting up the slides? So we're going to talk about the Thunderstorm Generator, and we're going to talk about it in terms of the transmutations that are actually taking place. And we'll methodically go through it using what we know from the current science and the various hypotheses that I have about the coherence domain in the water and how they interact with the plasmoids, which are the very essence of what is taking place in Malcolm's Thunderstorm Generator. Next slide. So this is an example of one of the generator sets. And I just want to mention, because I might mention them later on in the, if you look to the lower left, you'll see toward the middle where the bubbler is, and just behind it, something that's of a larger circumference, and that's where the air intake is. And the air intake goes through an area that has a UV light that excites it, and the engine is drawing when it wants to take in the air and the gas or the gasoline. It has a vacuum pull, and it's pulling the air bubbles through the bubbler. And there are a variety of ways of getting the air to actually bubble into small bubbles, and even make them smaller diameters, which I'm not going to go through, but you can see the stainless steel in the strips of stainless steel that are in the bubbler. From the bubbler arise the plasmoids, and we're going to talk about that. The plasmoids, along with the air, if you follow the copper pipe, go into the lower sphere on the outside. And the sphere is not just a sphere, it's actually 3 nested spheres. And it goes into the shell volume between the outer sphere and the middle sphere. And it's turning anti-clockwise. And then it goes out up the 4-inch pipe. Actually, the pipe is a pipe with a pipe. It goes into its own area, reaches the top sphere, goes around in the top sphere, when I'm talking about the bubbler. So did I say anti-clockwise? It should be clockwise. And from there, it goes into the carburetor of the engine. When it comes out, the plasmoids absorb the energy of the explosion. Some of that energy is absorbed. It comes out. You can see the attachment of the top sphere right to the engine exhaust, and it goes counterclockwise in the top sphere, goes to the bottom sphere counterclockwise, and comes out. What is happening is, that's amazing in this setup, is how the plasmoids are forming and what the plasmoids are doing in the spheres. And so the rest of the presentation, I will show you evidence of transmutations taking place. I have the pictures, I have the analysis, and this is one of the things that provides hard evidence that something very unusual is happening with this very simple setup. Next slide. So, as I was mentioning, there is an anomaly. The anomaly has sort of 2 parts. The standard part is the exhaust gas analysis that the automobile companies use to analyze the mixture of what's coming out in the exhaust. And what's the anomaly is that instead of having a lot of carbon that comes out as carbon dioxide, coming out as carbon monoxide, it's low. And also coming out from the exhaust are the oxides of nitrogen in the automobile, usual automobile. And in this setup, it's low. And also coming out are hydrocarbons. Some of those are particulates, and the hydrocarbons are probably one of the main entities that's responsible for the low air quality. And the last one, high oxygen. Usually the oxygen is low because the oxygen that's coming into the intake is being used to burn the fuel. And so it's low. But here, it's coming out in 15, 17% percent high oxygen. So this is anomalous. And then we're going to see the second part, which is the sphere residue analysis, which shows presence of carbon-14. I won't spend much time on that one. I will spend time on the presence of elements that we find as residue in the spheres, which is not in the air, nor is it in the natural gas, which was actually the fuel for the engine, which had the 24-inch spheres on it. And we'll say a little more about it later. Next slide. So the question that one has to ask is, how can this happen? Somehow the carbon was transmuted to oxygen, but fusion needs the high temperature and pressure of the stars. How can this happen in these little stainless steel nested spheres with the plasmoids, and it's happening at low temperatures compared to what goes on in the stars, which are in the millions of degrees? This is a true anomaly. It's unbelievable if you start from the current science paradigm. And now for the rest of the presentation, everything that I'm going to say will be from the science side as best as we can do it. Next slide. One of the things that we're going to see is the periodic table. And this periodic table, I just want you to note, what's the relationship between carbon and oxygen? They're 2 atomic numbers away, which means that the oxygen has 2 more protons and 2 more neutrons. And what is it that has 2 protons and 2 neutrons? It's helium. And so just to give you what's coming up, it's the helium fusing with the carbon that produces oxygen. So in that sense, the oxygen is actually increasing and the carbon is decreasing by that kind of transmutation. We'll talk about this process. I'll show you the equations behind it. And we'll talk a little bit about how the plasmoids are working, and actually a little bit about the new emerging science of water. Next slide. So the spheres were part of a natural gas caterpillar G358E, 3508E, which was a 400 kVA engine generator set in an Australia power substation. It had 500 hours of operation. This substation, it was not used continuously. It was used at the peak demand times. It would turn on and help out, provide the extra power that was needed for the peak demand. The outer sphere, as I mentioned, was 24 inches. The nested inner spheres, which are concentric, were 18 inches and 12 inches. I heard a little bit about the conversation that Malcolm was having earlier when he's going over the plasmoid unification model. And just want to note, 24, 18, and 12 are in the ratio of 4 to 3 to 2. If you try spheres that are not in this ratio, it won't work. What does this have to do with the transmutations? And I've heard many times Malcolm say that what's going on with the spheres is that there's resonance going on. And the retrofit is like a musical instrument. Everything has to be in tune. All right, getting back to the spheres in 2024, a little over a year ago, in April, Malcolm disassembled the spheres from the engine. He had them cut up into pieces. Next slide. These were mainly 2-inch by 2-inch sections. They were given to Bob Grenier of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project to examine. Grenier used a scanning electron microscope with an energy dispersion spectroscopy system. So the microscope itself shines a very highly focused beam of electrons, very small diameter beam. And this energy dispersion spectroscopy system is another system that is sitting with the scanning electron microscope. And it's using the X-rays that are coming off the place that the electron beam is shining on. And it's analyzing the nature of the energies that has. And so it becomes like a spectroscopy system, and it actually can tell you all the elements that are involved in that beam, or if you like, you can make it go in a line segment or various kinds of different kinds of shape, and that's what you'll see. The analysis, just to show you what's going to happen ahead of this, the analysis of the residues that were on these spheres showed presence of carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Okay, fine. Carbon is from the fuel, the oxygen and nitrogen are from the air. The fact that we have elements of those in compounds on the surface of the spheres, that's perfectly understandable. But in addition, silicon, sulfur, calcium, sodium, aluminum, chlorine, zinc, magnesium, titanium, chromium, all right, iron and nickel. Many of these are not in the fuel and are not in the air. And they were not in the stainless steel spheres. You can argue about the iron. That's an element that's part of the stainless steel. And it pretty much doesn't go much beyond nickel. And there's a reason for that, and we'll show it just in a few minutes. Next slide. So the first question that one has to ask is, are there fusions which actually can produce these kind of elements? And the answer is yes. And we're going to show a number of different kinds. These are the direct fusions of carbon with carbon. Carbon with carbon can make magnesium, plus a positron and a neutrino electron. And 13.39 millions of electron volts for each time that it does that. It can make magnesium with one neutron shorter, and the neutron can be given off. But this is an endothermic reaction, meaning it needs 2.6 million electron volts to actually take place. Carbon with carbon can also fuse together and make sodium, and it releases a hydrogen, and it's an exothermic reaction. And carbon with carbon can make neon. And when it does make neon, it also leaves some helium. That's an exothermic reaction. And here we have the next one is an endothermic reaction, meaning it needs to have energy in order for it to go. Carbon with carbon can make oxygen by a fusion process. And in that process, it releases two heliums. And finally, the last one is a fission process. Carbon itself can break up into three heliums. Needs a bit of energy to do that. Now, you'll notice that we have helium. Helium is not a gas that is going to form chemical compounds. Neither is neon. Keep that in mind for a moment. Next slide. Not only can the carbon fuse, but the oxygen can fuse directly. Oxygen with oxygen, we get a sulfur, plus some energy. Oxygen and oxygen can make phosphorus, yielding an extra proton. Oxygen and oxygen can make sulfur with an extra neutron being emitted. Oxygen and oxygen can make silicon, with some helium as well. And finally, oxygen can fuse together to make magnesium and two heliums. Next slide. Just a few other direct fusions. Carbon with nitrogen plus an extra neutron will make aluminum. And it's a exothermic reaction. Sodium and magnesium, which you just saw could be made directly, can fuse together with three neutrons and make vanadium. And nitrogen with nitrogen can fuse together and make silicon. All exothermic reactions. All of these kind of reactions, they were known from the 1950s, late 1950s. Books were published by the early 1960s that were in the astronomy books. And what's interesting is that the person who is a physics major, undergraduate physics major, probably by his second semester, is learning some of, if it's not second semester, it would be the third semester, is learning about these reactions. Now, I emphasized helium. Why? Because in stars like our sun, it's essentially fusing hydrogen, and enough hydrogens together can make a helium. And when all the hydrogen is fused together, the star becomes a red giant star. And when it becomes a red giant star, it begins to fuse the helium. And as the helium gets fused, it fuses with itself. Three heliums will fuse to get a carbon. A carbon will fuse to get an oxygen, as I pointed out earlier. And so we get many elements get generated by the fusion of an element with a helium. Next slide. Yes, next slide. Good. So here, just again, the periodic table, we can take a look. First, the carbon with a helium goes to an oxygen. The oxygen with a helium goes to a neon. The neon with helium goes to magnesium, and magnesium will go to silicon, then to sulfur, then to argon, another noble gas. And it continues in this process with the calcium, titanium, chromium, and it gets up to iron. All of those fusion processes with the heliums are exothermic. They generate heat. They generate energy. And that's the energy of the stars shining. When you come up to iron, which is Fe, when you come up to iron and you fuse it with helium, you get nickel. Just two atomic numbers to the right. But that process is not exothermic, it's endothermic. It requires energy for it to happen. And when a red giant star starts to produce the nickel, the process absorbs energy from the star, and that's the beginning of the red giant star's death. So here's this, and I'll say something about the process that does it, and I'll show you the equations in just in the next slides. I just want to say that what is happening here is we do know the kinds of processes which can do the transmutation. What we don't know is how is it possible to do these kind of transmutations with some spheres at a little higher than ordinary temperatures, a few hundreds of degrees Celsius. That we don't know, and that's what has to be discussed. And we'll do the best of what we know so far about that process. It's going to be the major part of the presentation. But let's go on to the next slide. And here we are. It's called the alpha ladder process. And Malcolm wants to say it's the alpha and omega ladder process, just because of the connotation of what alpha and omega mean in another context. Now, this is the ones we're starting from the even atomic numbers, so we'll start from the carbon. And there you see the carbon goes to with a helium, fuses to the oxygen, and it leaves a neutrino and a positron, plus some energy. The oxygen goes with a helium and becomes the neon, with a positron and a neutrino. The neon goes with a helium to make magnesium, with a positron and a neutrino. And there's magnesium that goes with a helium to silicon, and silicon goes with a helium for sulfur, and sulfur goes with a helium to argon. Notice all of these are exothermic processes. There are three gases that have been mentioned here. One was the helium, one was neon, and one was argon. We cannot expect those to be as residues because they won't react with any chemical and form a compound that might be a residue on the spheres. And so those would be emitted in the exhaust. One of the things that needs to be done thoroughly is to use a mass spectrometer on the exhaust gases to see the degree to which we have a presence of neon, helium, and argon. Now, argon, there's some small amount of argon in the air, and so finding this in the exhaust is not, let's say, unusual if you have sensitive enough instruments. But the neon and the helium is really not in the air. And if you find those in the exhaust, it is telling us that this alpha ladder process is one of the processes which are producing the transmutation. And in fact, it actually, the way some people would say it, seals the knowledge that indeed there are bona fide transmutations going on. Now, this alpha and omega ladder process goes with the even atomic numbers. It also goes with the odd atomic numbers. And so the next slide will start not from carbon, but it will start from nitrogen. So there you see nitrogen with helium plus an extra neutron. And by the way, when you have these transmutations processes going on, there are things like protons and neutrons which are floating around. So nitrogen with helium plus a neutron forms the ordinary fluorine. Without the neutron, it forms an isotope of fluorine. Fluorine with helium, you get sodium. Sodium with helium, you get aluminum. Aluminum fusing with helium, you get phosphorus. Phosphorus fusing with helium, you get chlorine. Chlorine fusing with helium, you get potassium. Potassium fusing with helium and 2 neutrons, you get scandium. Scandium with helium, you get vanadium. Vanadium with helium, you get manganese. Manganese with helium, you get cobalt. Cobalt with helium and an extra neutron, you get copper. Copper, I'm going a little further than the iron now. Copper with helium, you get to gallium. So these are the processes of which there is no uncertainty about. By spectroscopic examination in various different bands of wavelengths, the astronomers have provided evidence that these are the processes taking place in the stars. So at this point, we have to get over, well, that was in the stars. What does this have to do with the retrofit of the Thunderstorm generator onto a diesel engine or a gasoline engine or a gas engine? We have to come to that, and we are coming to it. Next slide. Oh, yes, gamma radiations. The fusion processes in the stars emit gamma radiation. Hey, if you have a thunderstorm generator and it's emitting gamma radiation, you have a safety issue here. But what happens? There's no gamma radiation. I had a very, very long talk with physicist Nigel Dyer. He's actually a quantum physicist. And he says that years ago, he worked out that the neutrinos, more neutrinos could be generated instead of having the energy be generated the way we've talked about it. And how is it that in the thunderstorm generator that there is no gamma radiation and you have the neutrinos instead? It's the plasmoids. And we're going to have to say something about the plasmoids. The plasmoids, for me, are the least that I know about it from the point of view of the science. In fact, I'm working with a quantum field physicist these weeks. He's a double PhD. His first PhD is in physics with the quantum field theory. His second PhD is in mathematics. This is a beautiful combination. He's really a smart guy. And it's kind of well known that the mathematics that physics people use is a bit of a sloppy mathematics. and what I've just told you is a little secret between the mathematicians and the physicists. But the work that he will do, the math will be sound. Next slide. By the way, you know why we're doing the slides this way and I'm not in control of the slides? Because this laptop, which is connected to the internet, has been hacked. And certain functions don't work about it, and we didn't find out about that until just this evening. Anyway, I'll say more about that later. Now I'd like to come to the electron microscope sections. What we see here is on, now I didn't mark whether they were the inner surface of the outer sphere, the outer surface of the central sphere, or the inner surface of the central sphere. All of those have been examined. I just haven't marked them in the images. This is a 29 micron field view. You see the blue arrow? The scanning electron microscope is sweeping that particular line. And in the middle, you see something that looks like a slice of a lemon? It's not a slice of a lemon. This is something that's protruding. It's in a, imagine looking at a trumpet with the wide open end and you're looking straight down it. That's this geometry. Transmutations were occurring in this area. Look at the elements that were found besides the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen: aluminum, sulfur, chromium, iron, and nickel. Next slide. Here you see another version of these tubes. These tubes, by the way, there's something on the other side of the surface. The plasmoids themselves are actually going through the surface of the spheres. And they're going from one side and they're coming out this other side. So we have the usual carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, but here we have sulfur, chromium, iron, and nickel. Next slide. This is a 157 micron field of view. And in addition to the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, there's magnesium, silicon, chromium, manganese, and iron. Remember, when I named the elements, I'm not saying that those elements exist as elements, isolated elements here. They can be into various different kinds of compounds and oxides and so on. But the spectroscopy is picking up the element itself. And here you can see a blue circle toward the top middle of the image, a blue circle with like a cross in it. That's the area that's being examined. And in that area, which includes the white stuff and the gray stuff and the black stuff, what was found is the elements that I read off. Next slide. This is a 55 micron view. We're going to show a number of views of this because here it is, an open, I want to say a tunnel kind of a thing. This is an area where there was transmutations taking place. Aluminum, silicon, sulfur, calcium, chromium, iron, and promethium. which is actually beyond iron. It's one of the few examples, in addition to nickel, which was produced by the fusion process itself, the process that's called the alpha and omega ladder process. Next slide. We're in roughly the same area, 50 micron field of view. You can see a little blue arrow sort of on the rim of what that tunnel thing is. And we have silicon, sulfur, calcium, chromium, iron, nickel. None of those, well, maybe you could argue sulfur was part of the natural gas. I don't know whether that's a good argument or not. But these are elements that are showing up as residues in the spheres, and they were not part of the air, and they were not part of the fuel. Next slide. We're in the same place. Now we're looking inside that tunnel. And here we have aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine, potassium, calcium, chromium, iron, and nickel. If you look to the last column, you will see that the oxygen and the carbon are in the highest concentrations, and the others are in the lower concentrations. But here, the important point is we're not trying to manufacture these elements by fusion. We're just recognizing that we have an anomaly. They shouldn't exist. They weren't in the fuel. They weren't in the air. They should not exist. And the only way to get to their existence is we have the alpha ladder process. Next slide. This maybe is the last one I'm showing. Some of the formations that you see are toroidal, as this one is. Another kind of formation that we have is sort of like a sphere, small sphere. So right smack in the middle of the image, you can see the blue circle with the vertical and horizontal lines. And in that area, besides the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, sulfur, chlorine, calcium, iron, and nickel. I have many images, maybe 4 times what I'm showing now, but it would get boring. Even though, in certain sense, each image is a surprise. This is the strong evidence that there are transmutations going on. We have the equations. We know that those equations work. What we don't know is we don't understand. How is it working with these spheres? How is it working? You know, the big fusion reactor, tokamak, takes a huge room, and it's organized in a toroidal shape, the reactor, and they have a plasma, which is working with a magnetic field to hold the fusion that would take place and surround it and confine it. And do you know, for as many years as this tokamak idea has been around, and for I don't know how many millions and millions of dollars have been spent on it, through last year, they were only able to hold the plasma for some tens of seconds because the plasma is unstable. which now I'm going to link to the plasmoid. The plasmoid was named by a physicist in around 1985. The name implies there's a plasma connection, yes, but the plasmoid is suggestive of a structure, which is why it was given this name, a stable structure. And we're going to talk about this just in a few minutes. Actually, it's going to be the last things we'll talk about. Next slide. Yes. Now we're coming to what it is that we know that is making this work. And so you'll see, we know some things. We have some hypotheses. The hypotheses have to be tested. And we want to see the equations. Now, when I say equations, these are equations at two different levels. First, we have to see the quantum field equations. Second, we need to see the equations that are suitable to give to an engineer, whether it's a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, chemical engineer. Which one did I miss? I said electromechanical, civil engineer, whatever. And with these equations, that engineer can now design devices that are useful to society. Without those equations, the engineers can't do anything. My background, by the way, is an electrical engineer. So I know about systems. And I know how one analyzes systems. Basically, all the engineering people have learned different pieces of that. We don't have those equations. The engineers, if you said, design something that does what Malcolm's Thunderstorm Generator does, they would throw up their hands and they would know, they would say they have no way of proceeding. They don't have the very basics that you have to have in engineering. And these basics are the kind of things that we eventually want to come out from the quantum field theory. And once we have the equations in the quantum field theory, there's another layer that has to be gone through and bring it to the point where we have the equations that are suitable for engineers of different types to be able to go and design devices, machines, instruments with these kinds of things in mind. Let's talk about the water coherence domains and plasmoids. I've already said the plasmoid is a structured plasma. And I've already hinted at that the plasmoids play an important role in the transmutation process. Who says that? It's Malcolm. This is what Malcolm is teaching. Where do the plasmoids come from? They originate in the bubbler. How do they originate in the bubbler? Because the bubbler has cavitating bubbles. And our hypothesis is that the water plasmoids form from the energy released by the cavitating bubbles that affect neighboring water coherence domains, which then fuse to form the plasmoids. As I said before, the resultant plasmoids travel to the engine with the air intake. They pick up energy from the engine combustion cylinder from its explosion. They travel to the shell volume between the outer sphere and the middle sphere. They rotate in a counterclockwise direction, and in this rotation, they cause the fusion. Not put on this slide is they cause the fusion by creating ball lightning. Ball lightning is a phenomena that has been known for hundreds of years. It's a phenomena that doesn't last by measuring in minutes. It lasts maybe for 10, 20 seconds at most. You could have a ball 10 inches in diameter, glowing, no skin, just a structured plasma that very easily can lose its structure. And these, historically, these ball lightning balls have been known to be seen on the outside from a window and come into the house going right through the walls without burning anything. Nobody understands how that happens. Anyway, it's in the spheres that the fusion happens, and we need to fill out some of these ideas to the degree that we can, enough so that we have hypotheses for the quantum field theorist to work out. One of the first things that have to be worked out is the concept and the geometric form of the plasmoid. Does it have a stable structure? And the quantum field theorist I'm working with believes it does. He hasn't done all the minutiae in the equations. Sometime later in spring, he'll have enough time to work on it, and we'll see that it's stable. That's the first thing. The next thing is, once we know the geometry, because nobody has seen a plasmoid of this kind that's working in the Malcolm Thunderstorm Generator. Sometimes I think you might be able to see flashes of light. And if we had a wide bandwidth camera, we would probably be able to see these kind of things going off in the bubbler. So far, that hasn't been done. But we expect that to happen. And we expect to be able to get instruments to validate that. What did I leave out? The plasmoids pick up the energy in the engine combustion cylinder. They travel to the shell volume. Between the outer and the middle sphere, they rotate in counterclockwise direction. And by ball lightning, they cause the fusion. We'll say some more about that in a little bit. Next slide.
Emphasize there. Can you hear us okay?
I didn't hear what you said.
Just
1 second, Robert.
So I think at this stage, before we move on, that the one thing I want to clarify is that the Vajra, which is the Lord Indra's weapon, and the most powerful weapon in the universe, which means it's the most powerful generator of directed energy in the universe, is because the plasmoids have their self-contained electromagnetic field, and they also work as a collective. So they have, through the 0 point, they have a connection, so they can structure and organize because they have a mechanism at the 0 point where there is no time-space that they can actually communicate with each other in real time across the universe. And this is also for the military application, is that means you can have a system which I have proven conclusively, where you can transmit, for example, from the bottom of the ocean in real time with no time delay from a submarine, with no one can tap it, because you have two species of plasmoids produced in the same vial, and you separate the water, and you can take the water to Japan, and you can put electric charge in the water in India, right, or to America, and you can transmit a signal between them, because they're operating through the 0 point where there is no time space. So there's no signal delay, and there's nothing that stop it from transmitting. And no one can decipher it, because it's only that species that's talking to each other. And I proved that conclusively, because I flew the half sample of the other scientist, and we proved conclusively that's the case. The other thing is, this is the ball lightning. That thing you were showing was a sphere. Those crenulated iron spheres, because that's another thing, the texture. I think you've got a picture of that you could probably pull up for us, Robert. The crenulated iron sphere is a, when the ball lightning for crop circles hits, you have crenulated iron spheres that are only a few microns across, or 20 microns across, but they're perfectly geometric, and they've imploded into the 0 point as a sphere. So, and they extrude diamond, but they can extrude 100 times their volume or more, that as a diamond tube. Yeah. So, and those things we saw in the background, those images, you have diamond tubules, and as you mentioned, those diamond tubules went through the stainless steel, came out the other side and back again. So because the 0 point, there is no time space, matter doesn't exist. If matter doesn't exist, it can go through anything, right? This is profound. And that's why it's the most powerful weapon in the universe. Do you know why? It can go through anything. It doesn't care. In fact, it's to them, it's just food, candy, yeah? Because they just eat it up. So this is the difference between our science and the real science. It's the difference between knowing frequencies links to matter and matter's links to frequency. And so if you know that in the 0 point, so I just want to make, because this leads on, Rob, so, and I want to get the audience. The Vajra is the tool that's downloaded to the avatar so as to defeat the demons destroying the planet. So basically, that means that this instrument, the Vajra that we're building, produces the Vidrit that's in the V-I-D-Y-U-T, that's in the Sanskrit text. That's a Vajra, and it's designed to produce Vidrit. In the Sanskrit text, it states that the avatar, you'll know the avatar because he'll come with the Vajra, because it's only the avatar has a relationship with the Vidrit. So I had a relationship with the Vajra, and maybe you can segue onto this, Robert, about our strange connection through Guy Obolinski, and the 3 years I spent creating the thing, just as a nice little segue. I can see that's amusing you, so that's all good.
Yes, he brought the name of Guy Obolinski. I'll tell you a little story. I lived upstate New York from the city by about a half an hour, 45-minute drive in the Rockland County. 20 minutes away from me is Guy Obolinski in Sloatsville, a small village. And I had some connections with people who connected me with Guy Obolinski. Guy Obolinski was an amazing person. He had an amazing knowledge. He actually replicated all of Tesla's stuff. He knew it. And here I was, distinguished professor, and I'm coming into contact with Guy Obolinski, who knows all kinds of things other people don't know. And of course, the mind of a scientist is filled with curiosity. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to learn more. And I would be meeting with Guy once and twice a week, helping him in his laboratory, in his shop. And I asked him, can I be your apprentice? Because here was somebody who knew things beyond what was in the textbooks. Guy never answered me. When Malcolm and I met, I forget how it arose, but Guy Obolinski arose. I think maybe he said something about that. Yes, he said something about it because Guy Obolinski had an instrument, a machine, a Tesla machine, if you will, that would emit plasmoids. And when those plasmoids reach your body and come into the body, they help heal all kinds of illnesses, even cancers. Anyway, so Guy had this small little clinic going on, basically, where people would come in and stay in the machine for an hour or so. And Malcolm was doing it for more than an hour or so. And he was there. And when Malcolm and I met, and Guy Obolinski was mentioned in conjunction with the plasmoids that Malcolm was absorbing, we realized that we had something in common. And we knew the reason why Guy Obolinski never accepted me as an apprentice. Do you know why? Because Malcolm was his apprentice at that time. Isn't that an amazing story? All right, so let's get back. What Malcolm said is way beyond what I have in the slides. Yes, I think we were talking about the questions that you raise. The next slide, the next one is where we're up. We understand that the fusion reactions require high temperatures and high pressures. This is what happens in the stars. And if you try to make a fusion reactor like a tokamak reactor, it requires a lot of space. It requires millions of dollars to build. And to assert that this kind of fusion can happen with a bubbler and nested spheres connected up in the right shapes and the right geometry and the right dimension is not consistent with the current paradigm. Then what? If it's not consistent with the current paradigm, some people could argue all the demonstrations are all flawed. Something is happening behind the scenes, you're not seeing it. The instruments are not functioning the way they're supposed to. They're not being used in the correct manner. You can go on with all kinds of issues that the demonstration, which you're about to see, is flawed because it's not consistent with the current science paradigm. Next slide. And this basically summarizes that the claim that something has been demonstrated by many people in many places is flawed because it's not predicted by the current paradigm. This is to impede the science. The true scientist will not get caught in that trap. What is the science for? The science is actually to develop our understanding of the material reality, the physical reality in which we live, and all of the processes that are going on in that reality. To be able to write the equations, to develop the theory, so we can know and we can predict, and we can make machines that are useful. That's where the science comes in. And if you outright say something that is unusual and not expected, and therefore, because of its inconsistency with the current science, throw it out, you're acting not as a scientist, because you're impeding the very science you really want to promote. Next slide. In order to advance the science, and this is what I'm saying is not new, you start from the physical demonstration or experiment, and then you work to extend the current paradigm to include the new results. And when you do that, the current paradigm expands to include new results, and that results in advancing the science. And this is what is happening here with Malcolm's invention, the Thunderstorm Generator. The true scientists will take this point of view, and we're trying to get the organization set up. There have to be many, many different people in the physics world, in different countries, in different departments, with the different differences in their backgrounds and their expertise, to all work on this, so that the equations can be written, that the science in its current form can be extended, so that the engineers will have the equations to be able to now build new devices and machines. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to come to the particulars of how the plasmoids form. All of what I'm going to say here about the formation itself, this is a hypothesis. We're going to see if we can get the quantum field theorists to be able to provide the equations that match it, or to say this can't happen this way, but it has to happen that way. Either way, there's an advance in the science. All right, so we're going to start with the coherence domains. Remember that I said I wanted to be able to do experiments with water. My interest had changed. And the various properties of water, that the water is actually carrying a memory, but it's not like a memory in a digital computer, a fixed state. Everything is happening by waves, by oscillations. And the coherence domain is actually a collection of around 5 million or so water molecules in a compact volume, and they are all oscillating in phase within a self-entrapped magnetic field. I have to explain all of this. But first, a little language from the quantum field theory. The electrons of the water molecule can be in a superposition of a ground state and an excited state. What does that mean? In the turn of the century model of the atom, you have the electrons running around in a circle, the nucleus. And you have the inner orbits, and you have orbits that are going outer, further and further outer. And it's the outer ones that have the higher energy and the inner ones that have the lower energy. So in the Born model of last century, you would talk about the orbitals. You'd be talking about the electrons running around. In the quantum field theory, you don't talk about that. You use the word orbital, but what you actually mean is energy. So the electrons are the water molecule. And here, if we want to think about electrons, just for the moment, think about the electrons, the electron on a hydrogen atom. It has a ground state and an exciting state. And this kind of self-entrapped magnetic field and the oscillation, meaning the electron state, again, I'm using the language of the classical Born model, is oscillating from the outer orbit to the inner orbit and to the outer orbit and to the inner orbit. And the quantum theory says you don't talk that way. You really have a superposition of ground state and excited state. And if the superposition has all probability in the same one state, you can call it a stationary state. But you can have a quantum combination of two states, and it's written in this form. Psi is equal to the square root of P. Vertical 1s refers to the 1s orbit, plus the square root of 1 minus P to the orbit 2s, which is the next orbit above. And the P is actually the probability of being in the one state, and the 1 minus P is the probability of being in the other state. That language itself has a problem because you don't know what state it's in until you take the measurement. Maybe I have this on the next slide. Yeah, okay. So the 1s with the caret and the 2s with the caret, they represent quantum states corresponding to the s, to the 1s, and to the 2s orbital states. The coefficients, the square root of P, oh, I see I made an error here. It should be slash square root. That would give us the square root sign. 1 minus P are complex amplitudes. Left out are the dependencies of the states on time and space. And the square magnitudes of these amplitudes are the probabilities P and 1 minus P. And they represent the probabilities that the electron, when measured, will be found in the corresponding orbital state. And of course, if you measure it, you've collapsed the whole thing, and now you've destroyed the superposition. Before you take the measurement, the electron is not in either states. It's in both states at once. Next slide. We were talking about coherence domain. So what's going on with a coherent state? The electrons exist, again, just thinking about the hydrogen atom. The electrons exist in a superposition of energy states. And there's a fixed phase relationship between these two energy states. And in the classical language, you would say the electrons are oscillating predictably between the energy states. Actually, it's the probability density that's oscillating in time in a predictable and phase-locked way. And when many water molecules in the same volume are synchronized in their quantum behavior, you have a coherent state. Next item. Next slide. How do you get them to this coherent state? How does this happen? So this what I'm telling you now, this is quantum physics that was worked out by a quantum physics and a quantum field theorist at that, one of the early ones in the late 1980s. His name is Giuliano Preparata. And it's kind of interesting. When I started working with this quantum field theorist, He wanted to do his own reading. I gave him a lot of papers, but he wanted to do his own reading. So what did he start to do? He started to read about plasmas. These are not structured plasmas. And furthermore, it's all explainable. You don't need to go to the quantum field theory to explain it. You can do it in quantum mechanics. Anyway, the whole thing was a waste of time, but that's the way he chose to look at it until I finally convinced him that he has to read Preparata. And this week, in fact, early this week, he finally got the Preparata book that was published in 1995. And he sees that it's actually written from the quantum field theory point of view. And he's delighted now to start reading that. Okay. How did the electron get from the ground state in the inner orbit, in the low energy state? How did it get from there into a high energy state and have the oscillations going on? And here we have the vacuum. The vacuum is actually teeming with energy. What happens is that virtual particles pop out of the vacuum. They're in a superposition between physical reality and the vacuum. And when the energy they carry is the energy required for an electron to jump orbit, because the orbits are quantized, they have certain energies, and to go from one orbit to another, you have to absorb exactly a certain amount of energy. And so when the energy that these virtual particles carry is the energy that is required for this electron to jump orbit, you have a resonance effect, and the electron absorbs the energy. And this effect is a ratchet action. Ratchet means it made the step, it will oscillate, but it doesn't return to a stationary ground state. It starts the oscillation. For an electron to jump from the 1s orbit to the 2s orbit requires about 10.2 electron volts. And eventually, by this ratchet action of these virtual particles popping into existence, actually, I'm even using classical language, it's a superposition. And in the superposition, the electron is able to absorb energy by a resonance effect. Now, we've only talked about one electron. The 5D orbit means the electron has an energy of 12.07 electron volts. This is happening to all the electrons on all of the hydrogen atoms simultaneously together. How do they pop in from the vacuum? How do they pop into existence? The water is a liquid. It's a liquid through and through. Well, that's the way we think about it when we deal with water. Actually, what's between a water molecule and its neighbor? More liquid water? No. Liquid water is made up of the water molecules. And the water molecules are floating around. And the space between them is a vacuum. So in your glass of water, or in a beaker of water, or in a pond, or in a stream, or in the ocean, it's all happening simultaneously. The water is absorbing energy from the vacuum. Think about this for a moment. This electron that we're talking about is going to get an energy of about 12 electron volts. And it's going to oscillate in sync with the electromagnetic field. that's part of the coherence domain. The energy that came from the vacuum, first of all, it was very low energy. You know, like an electron volt, maybe a little more on the average. And it had high entropy. So if you have high entropy and low energy, the high entropy prevents you from using it. This goes to the classical concept that the universe is going to run down because every action, reaction that occurs increases the entropy. This is in the classical sense. And makes the energy unusable. But what we just have here, the process, the particles show up as high entropy, disordered energy, low energy. And relative to that low energy, we get the electrons that are going to be oscillating from the outer orbit to the inner orbit, from the excited state to the ground state, back and forth. This process is a neg entropy process. It's something that's not supposed to happen, but it does. And this is all in the theory. This has all been worked out. Next slide. So each electron is like an oscillator. In the coherent state, they're all oscillating at the same frequency in phase. That means up, down, like that. There's a sort of a metaphor for it. So the electron, each is an oscillator. And now I want you to think, if you took many pendulums and you place them on a table, all the pendulums identical, and you just start them oscillating back and forth, after a little bit of time, they will all become oscillating in phase with each other. So if they're oscillating, they go like that. They're all going that way at the same time. What's actually happening is the fact that the pendulums are on the table. There's a connection between one pendulum and the other through the table. And that causes the coherence to occur. Same thing with the electrons. The electrons are influencing the other electrons. They're like local oscillators. And in time, the phase all becomes the same. And that's how we get 5 million or so electrons in a shape of on the order of, let's say, 70 nanometers at room temperature, all oscillating in phase, all working together, if you will. Next slide. One more thing. The 5D orbit is the electron is having an energy of 12.07 electron volts. Around everything is this thermal energy called KT energy. And if this energy hits an electron while it's in the excited state at the 5D orbit, and it's having the energy of 12.07 electron volts, and the KT energy has 6 electron volts or higher, the electron has enough energy to leave its proton. We're talking about the hydrogen atom now. and it moves to the outside of its coherent domain. It doesn't go away to, a football field away. It stays close. It becomes what's called a quasi-electron, and it circulates around the coherence domain. We hypothesize, based on something that was actually said to me by another quantum field theorist, that the shape of the coherence domain is a torus. And this is going to fit in with what's happening in the formation of the plasmoid. Next slide. So we were talking about resonance. The coherence domains take the shape of a torus. Inside the torus is a self-entrapped electromagnetic field. That means the electromagnetic field has a wavelength that goes around the ring of the torus. And it's structured in such a way that it does not dissipate. It can be held in that structure for long times. And all the water molecules are oscillating in phase. And outside the torus are the quasi-electrons. And when the electrons are in the ground state, the energy is being carried by the field. And when the electrons make a shift to the excited state, the field gives the electrons energy. And when the energy makes a shift to the ground state, the electron transfers energy to the field. Those of you who know electrical systems, how does the classical electrical system oscillate? You have a capacitor and inductor. Hook those in parallel. Capacitor stores energy in the electric field. The inductance stores energy in the magnetic field. And what you actually happens in the oscillation is energy from the electric field is transferred through the inductor, is transferred into the magnetic field. And then the magnetic field energy is then transferred back into the electric field of the capacitor, and you have an oscillation. By the way, it's the same thing with a mechanical system, the classic mechanical system. A mass and a spring. And the mass is carrying energy by potential energy, and the spring is carrying energy by way of kinetic energy. And when the mass pulls the spring down, you have this energy in the spring to pull it up. And when the spring is all pulled up, you've decreased the energy in the spring, and you've increased the energy of the mass, because now it's higher, and therefore by the gravitation it can has energy as it falls. Anyway, it's the same system. Actually, not only is it the same system, do you know that the equations that you write, the differential equations that you write in the electrical engineering, when you're talking about inductor, capacitor, even throw in a resistor, when you write those equations, those differential equations, those are the same exact differential equations if you give me a mechanical system of a spring, a mass, and a damper. They're exactly the same. And they oscillate. If you have a resistive element in that makes a dissipation, the oscillations continue and they decrease in amplitude. If you have the ideal situation where there's no dissipation of the energy, then you can oscillate forever. These are the oscillations that are happening within the coherence domain. Next slide. These coherence domains, 70 nanometers in size, shaped like a torus. They're not floating around at random in some kind of Brownian motion. They actually form a geometric arrangement. They make stacks. That's my hypothesis. They make stacks. One torus on top of the next torus on top of the next torus. Remember, each of these is having an electromagnetic field inside the ring of the torus, going round and round the ring. Therefore, it has a propagation direction. What happens when you have one torus on top of the other, and one is propagating in a clockwise direction, and the other in an anti-clockwise direction? So now I'm going to use a little bit of the electromagnetic theory in electrical engineering. You have an energy carrying field, and you have a potential field which carries no energy. The potential field was thought at the turn of the century of the 1900s. This was just a nicety of the mathematics. You could talk about it as a potential field, but it's really not real, and you'd use it to make mathematical proofs a little easier. This was the state of belief of Oliver Heaviside, who, along with Biggs, developed the vector calculus, which is used all throughout all the engineering. It wasn't until 1956 that there was a very famous physicist by the name of Michael Bohm. He had a student by the name of Aharonov, who was doing his dissertation. And from the dissertation, they published a paper in one of the main physics journals. And the paper said that the potential field, particularly they were talking about the vector magnetic potential field, carries no energy, but will have an influence that can be observed. And this was crazy, because from the time of Newton, if you're going to influence anything, you have to have an energy transfer, right? What do you call it? When you play pool, you shoot a ball, hits another ball, and you have an energy exchange, and one influences the other. That's been a premise of science, of the paradigm of science, all through until 1989. Oh, I have it wrong. Paper was published in 1959, and it was 1986. Anyway, they started to do experiments a year after the paper was published. The people who were knowledgeable reading these papers, you would say they raised their eyebrows, but Michael Bohm was a very well-known, very bright, and a very strong contributor to the physics of those days. And it was only a theory paper, so didn't make much of a fuss. But the next year, there was an English physicist who decided to make an experiment in the way that Aharonov and Bohm said to do it. And he got a result. And the result was not perfect, but it was in the direction in which it was expected. At this point, the physics community made a ruckus, because now you're talking about an experiment which is yielding results which are absolutely against and inconsistent with the current paradigm. And there was a ruckus. And the physicists tried every which way to see, well, your experiment is incorrect. There's going to be a leakage of the energy carrying field in some way, shape, or form, and you can discount it. And this argument went on from 1959 through 1986. In 1986, there was a Japanese physicist who was actually doing solid-state physics. He was one of the pioneers in the theory side of how to make chips, kind of integrated circuit chips we have today. And he had the equipment to do it. And he made up an experiment and essentially surrounded the place where the field was, where the energy carrying field was. It was surrounded with superconductor. And everybody knew that magnetic fields can't get through a superconductor. And he had a perfect result. And when that happened, it began to be accepted. Not only was it accepted, from that time, in 1986, the physicists who are doing quantum physics, they now write their equations beginning with the potential fields. There's a potential electric field and there's a potential magnetic field. Why? Because these fields have more information than the energy carrying fields. You can have many different potential fields that cause the same energy carrying field. So all of their equations are written with the virtual fields, the potential fields. There's a lesson there. It took a few decades, from 59 to 86, almost 3 decades before it was accepted. And now it's the very essence of what goes on in quantum mechanics. When you start to see them, you'll see the equations, and they'll write an equation with an A. And the A stands for the vector magnetic potential field. It's interesting how physics changed. When that paper got published, people like Feynman accepted it. And Feynman, by that time already, was either a Nobel laureate already or close to being one. He was very well respected, and then everybody followed along. I only bring this up because there are things that are going on with these coherence domains that need to involve the potential fields. And in the explanation I gave, I didn't do that. But that has to come out. And now for the plasmoids. The plasmoids, we say, have formed in the bubbler. The bubbler has air bubbles, small air bubbles. If you were to look at the water in the bubbler, when the bubbler is working properly, you will not see a bubble. You'll just see a cloud because the bubbles are very small. Now, it's well known that these kind of bubbles have electrons on the outside and positive charges on the inside. The bubble itself is like a spherical capacitor. And what happens to these bubbles is they cavitate. They implode, not explode. They implode. That means the bubble is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You know what happens when you have some air in a contained space and you make the space smaller and smaller and smaller? What's going to happen? The air pressure gets higher and higher. The temperature gets higher and higher. You have something that's taking the energy, which is dispersed, let's just say, uniformly around this small bubble, and that bubble goes into a micro size, changing 1,000 or 10,000 times its dimension, its starting dimension. And now you have in a very small space, a very high density of energy. And the bubble cavitates. The bubble gets destroyed. What happens? First of all, there's an acoustic shock wave that occurs in the water. Second of all, there's a spherical longitudinal electric wave that forms. And here I am saying something that is beyond the Maxwell equations, which only allowed transverse waves. But there is a generalization of the Maxwell equations. Actually, there are 3 different generalizations I know of, one of which I've actually been through in detail myself. That was the one that was done with quaternions. And it says that the generalized Maxwell's equations will allow a longitudinal electric wave. That means when the wave is going this way, the oscillations in the wave are going like this. In a transverse wave, the wave is going this way, the electric field is oscillating this way, the magnetic field is oscillating this way. The propagation direction and the directions of magnetic and electric fields are all at right angles to each other. That's a transverse wave. Not only is there a transverse, a longitudinal electric wave, but there's a scalar field. A scalar field means that each point in space has a number associated. Temperature, for example, would be a scalar. You can think about it as a scalar entity because every point in space has a number, which is the temperature at that point. The units that go with that scalar field are Teslas if you use the new system of units, Webers per meter square if you use the old system. These are measurements of magnitudes of magnetic field. But this magnetic field does not have a north pole and a south pole like magnets have. I don't know how to visualize it. But that's what happens. And now the formation of the plasmoid itself. The bubble bursts, and we have the charge from the negative charges on the outside, the positive charges on the inside. The bubble collapses, and the 2 sets of opposite charges come together. And they cause a burst of energy, which results in the longitudinal electric waveform. And this shoots out rays, if you will, in all directions simultaneously. Now, what did I say about the geometry of the coherence domains? They form stacks. And all of the tori in the same stack, they all have the propagation direction of its internal magnetic field, electromagnetic field, they're all propagating in the same direction. Because if they weren't all propagating in the same direction, you could prove through actually the vector magnetic field is the easiest way to prove it, is that they would lose their strength of the glue that's holding them together. It would get weaker. And so the structure would not be so stable. What happens with a stack against a stack? If both are moving in a clockwise direction, this one is going like that, this one is going like that. Look what happens. When this one is coming like this, comes around to the front, and it goes back. And this one, the other one, is coming around the other way. No, it has clockwise. This way. It's going in the opposite direction. These two fields will oppose one another. So they can't be going stacks all in clockwise directions. The stacks adjacent to a stack, all of whose tori have internal fields that are going clockwise, the ones that are adjacent to it have to go counterclockwise. So we're sitting at some place in the stack with two tori, one of which is going clockwise, one of which has this self-entrapped field going clockwise, and the other going counterclockwise. And they're just meeting, but they're not one is not going within the other. And this ray comes along from the spherical discharge. There's an electric wave that comes along and hits it right where they meet. And that causes a fusion of the two tori of the coherence domains, which were already in oscillation, which already had self-entrapped fields. And now we have the plasmoid. The plasmoid is more than just the two tori, because now they come to a place where they overlap together. This is the place that Malcolm is calling the 0 point. And this is the place where, in some way, the ball lightning is associated with it. This is the place where the transmutations actually take place. And again, if you ask for the equations, we don't have them. They have to be worked out. But the remarkable thing, and I say it is absolutely remarkable, is that Malcolm understood all of this, not knowing a thing about the coherence domains, not knowing about the quantum physics and the field theory that was behind it, and how these oscillations were created stable, structured, essentially plasmas. And all of this needs to be worked out from the physics side. As I mentioned before, Malcolm has a whole system of numbers, which are more than numbers. And you can multiply and divide with these numbers, and you can get to all kinds of different relations. I'm trying to learn that. And someday I'll know a substantial piece of it anyway. And be able to start to link that business, which, by the way, is old Vedic mathematics. It was known thousands of years ago. but we don't know it today. India has a number of places in which the design itself of that architecture or of that temple involve the use of these numbers. So what's, in a certain sense, really interesting to me is India is coming to fulfill its what do I want to say? Its destiny as a country that is going to be a leader in the whole geopolitical area. And it has these ancient structures that involve this very number system that the academic world doesn't know about, and which can be used for the good of society. And I think that that's absolutely beautiful, because the time has come for India. Next slide. I think we're just about at the end. Yes, I think I talked about that. And now the process again. Plasmoids go to the carburetor with the air. They go into the engine cylinder. They absorb energy from the explosion in the cylinder. They carry a large charge. They come out the exhaust with many ions. They circulate counterclockwise within the volume or the shell between the middle sphere and the outer sphere. And they discharge the charge they're carrying in the nested spheres as ball lightning, and transmutation takes place in the 0 point of that fused tori. And anyway, Malcolm, if I've said something not quite right, please correct it. But this is the way I've so far understood things. Let's see, is this the last slide?
Yes.
Yes, we've come to the end.
Yeah, we want to thank you, Robert. This was incredibly amazing.
So you're going to just go through that, and then I'll just go through a few clarifications so that
Good.
Yep. So, but it's fantastic. As far as the summary goes, I think that's the best lecture I've ever heard in my life. It's the most succinct and clear, manifestation of the truth that I've ever been witness to. Not by technology. Well, stolen technology is actually the Vedic Akashic record, but I'm very pleased it's been downloaded, and it's the first time there's been an accurate, in this presentation, an accurate translation of what I downloaded from the Akashic record. So thank you for that personally. That's really a big step forward in the realization of the lost past. Yeah. You can finish it off with that.
So we're tracing the root of the plasmoids after they've been formed. And the plasmoids have a state that can be measured by the energy that it's holding. It's not something that only can hold so much. It's something that its structure allows it to hold more and more and more energy. And different devices that will be made and designed using this ancient technology will in fact have this happen with the energy that the plasmoids are able to carry. It goes into the engine cylinder, absorbs the energy from the explosion, not all of the energy, but it absorbs the energy from the explosion in the cylinder. And in the way of coming out, I don't know how it happens, but they carry a large charge with them. So now we have the charge. And actually, I have a sense that this charge is going to be like charge separation. There's going to be some positive, there's going to be some negative, or maybe some plasmoids are all positive and all negative, but in some way, that charge is allowed to be carried and yet not short together. How this happens? It happens by the structure of the plasmoid. This is where the real physics has to come in and catch up with the Vedic mode. And that's going to be very interesting to see actually that happen. Because in the Vedic world, there weren't differential equations. There weren't partial differential equations. There weren't boundary value problems. All of the science is built on these mathematical expressions that relate to that. And here we have numbers that are able to be put together in a way in which you can see that something is going to happen that's useful. Well, I don't know how many years I'm going to have to study this, because unlike Malcolm, who forgot everything he did when he got his PhD degree, I have more years to forget and to be open to this new ancient mathematics. I'll do the best I can to be open about it and to learn about it and to help actually translate this for other people so they can understand it as well.
Thanks for watching. We have a few more parts to come in the Alpha and Omega Ladder series, so please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel to catch everything next. And thanks also to everyone who has shared their positive feedback about the series so far. I feel similarly excited about everything that's happening, and I feel absolutely blessed to be in the midst of it and in a position to be able to help share all of these developments on alchemical science. So please share these videos as well. All the best to you, stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.